He's not going to split them on the middle. He's done it. He's going on board with John Rouillard. Rouillard's going to commit. He comes off to the inside. There's not again. He's going to spin it. He tried his best. How did he catch it? John never stopped.
Is there anything better than sports car racing at Daytona in January? If there is, I sure as hell don't want to know about it. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the VWSC Modern Sports Car World Championship. Bring it on. And it's the 2.4 hours of Daytona. Tonight, you are in the hot seat and you are glued to the right esports network. Do not change your dial. You are live on CMS Racing and JPB YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us and by accompanying us in our broadcast of tonight's epic encounter. I'm Jake Sanson. The man next to me in the virtual comms box is Michael David. Mike, we are in for an absolute thriller tonight. There's nothing quite as hot as Daytona in January.
Yeah, no, new year, new season, new cars. This is all going to be new for me. I'm excited to be here. I think that the racing we're going to get tonight is going to be absolutely stellar, and I can't wait to get started.
Absolutely right. And there's something about the way that this VWSC has been growing year upon year upon year. It just keeps getting better like a fine wine. And where better to do the start of the modern season than the Daytona Sports Car Road Course. 5.729 kilometers in length. That's 3.56 in miles, 12 turns. Oval turns are 31-degree banking. The tri-oval is 18 degrees. And the real world lap record is 133.724, set by Alex Palau in last year's Daytona 24 Hours in his caddy. And I can tell you already, folks, that in VWSC terms, we're already lapping quicker. It's going to be an epic first race of the modern hypercar season, and we are very excited about the exciting battles that we're going to get over the course of the 2023 season. It's obviously going to be a very busy season. We have all sorts to look forward to over the year. Portimao in Portugal, Sebring and Long Beach in the United States, Spa in Belgium, and of course on the 3rd of June, it's the 4.8 hours, the longest race of the year at where better than the Circuit de la Sarthe at Le Mans, Watkins Glen, the Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, Monza, Road America, Fuji, Indianapolis, Road Atlanta, and then the Bahrain International Circuit sees us through the season, as well as all of the exciting North American racing series on the Thursdays in the build-up to all of those race events. It is going to be a very busy calendar, and with that variety of racing circuits diversity on the calendar this year, Michael, there's going to be all sorts of challenges for the drivers and the new cars to face.
Yeah, these drivers are really going to be taking a bit of time to get used to these new cars. But the challenges of each track are going to be so separate. Like as we take Daytona here, you got those high oval banking curves And then you get this tight little flat, kind of awkward at times infield section that just kind of throws you around a little bit. And it's going to be exciting to see how these guys are able to, you know, their first task this season, learning these cars on this track.
Well, last year was a very significant one for VWSC. At this time last year, we were talking about Aston Martin Valkyries and Bugatti Bolides. None of those in 2023. Fortunately, the real world of sports car racing has gone nuclear, and as a result, VWSC has caught up pretty darn quickly. The modding team at Storm Gang Simulations have been working overtime in the off-season, and boy, have we got some beautiful cars to talk about in 2023. There are some mighty hypercars joining the grid for this year. And of course, the battle in GT3 is still going to be as exciting and spectacular as ever. 34 entered cars. There are definitely going to be some wild cards through the field as well, though. So there's plenty to talk about. And qualifying is about to get underway, and we'll kick off where better than with the GT3s. Now, obviously, there are no GTE AMs anymore. There are no GTE Pros. It's all about the GT3 cars, which have obviously got a little bit of running in now. And this is where we're going to see just as much competition as we'll see in the hypercar category. But for these guys, Michael, there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of setup. The run around this Daytona circuit is obviously very aggressive on strategy. And the GT3 cars, you'll get 7 or 8 drivers trying to go for the win tonight.
Yeah, this is going to be exciting to see how these different cars are able to kind of cope with this track. We're going to see who is able to, you know, reach those top speeds on the long banking and the straightaways. But we're also going to have these opportunities for some of these cars like the Porsches to really make a name for themselves in the tight twisty areas in the first part of the track. So I think it's going to be really exciting to see what kind of setups these guys went for. Obviously, like you said, it's going to be a little bit more of an option for the GT3 cars as opposed to the Mons cars and the Hypercars. So it should be a challenge for you guys. And I think we're going to see quite a bit of mixture up in the front between different type of cars.
We certainly are indeed. Once the hypercars get started, 10 minutes into the qualifying session, you're going to get the names of BMW, Peugeot, Porsche, Acura, Cadillac, and Ferrari all going to start to make their way up to the forefront. But, of course, as we get the GT3s out there, it's the usual protagonists. The Audis, the Porsches, the Acura NSX, the Bentley Continentals, the Mercs, the Beamers, and the Corvettes. You're going to see plenty of great excitement out there on the course. And worth pointing out, obviously, in the practice session, there are a handful of drivers that have been able to get consistent pace all the way through. But now that we're getting ourselves into the meat and bones of qualifying, things are going to be very treacherous for a few of the drivers who are still trying to get themselves a little bit up to speed. Because what we are going to find is that people are going to be pushing very hard indeed to try and find that little bit of extra time to eke it out of the radiuses of the apex. And what you'll tend to find is, on a circuit like Daytona, Mike, a lot of drivers will try to find that limit, try to ride it over the edge just a little bit too far. And certainly on a qualifying lap around Daytona, mistakes are easy to come by.
Well, mistakes are easy to come by at this track at any single turn. Sometimes you can kind of get lulled to sleep a little bit, and all of a sudden you're going down a straight, and here's turn 1. It's an awkward, like late left-hander into a little chicane there. So this track, you have to be on your toes at all times. I do want to say a lot of new things for me here. This is going to be the first time that I've seen the new C8 on track in the virtual world. It's going to be the first time I've seen the Ford Mustang on track in the virtual world. So I'm excited to see how those two cars are able to really keep up with your normal protagonists, like you said, the Audis, the Beamers, the Bentleys, the Porsches, the Ferraris. And I'm also excited to see how well that Bentley Continental is going to do, on those long banking curves from Daytona.
Yeah, last year, actually, the Bentley was quite a versatile all-rounder of a car. It's probably going to have a very similar sort of season in 2023, I would guess, but it did end up being quite a reliable bit of machinery for the contenders through the course of the year. We're just watching Luciano Picasso at the moment in the Continental GT3. Has been very strong over the course of free practice, certainly looking like a contender for the pole. Already on a hot lap, a 42.9 for the first sector. Not a bad run so far. Certainly looking pretty fluid with things as the first hot lap comes in. This is where you really get to push the car to its absolute limits. We saw this a lot last year, both in the hypercar and the GT3 category. You would hop and skip over those curbs to a certain degree where it would really start to hustle with the weight transfer. You are hopping over those curbs, trying to carry as much speed as possible. The back end gets really light over those curbs. And that's where the rear of the car always starts to overtake the front. You've really got to have nerves of steel to hang on to it as you come through. So there's a yellow in sector 2, which kind of suggests maybe somebody has tripped the Light Fantastic a little over the limit anyway. The target time, as you can see on the right, is a 1:42.9 and an opening gambit for Luciano Picasso of a 1:44. It's not bad. Brandon Gant has just bailed out on a lap by the look of it. So that's not gone well at all for the M4 driver for SRA League Unity. At the moment, it is Neto that is at the front end. Eliseo Neto in the Audi R8, in front of Alec King in the Shade Tree Motorsport Porsche, then Vasilis Katerinakis in the Acura NSX, and then fourth, as we mentioned, Luciano Picasso in front of Gutierrez in the Mercedes, and up to sixth now comes Stuart Barge, although it's displaced immediately by Luis Lemos in the Audi R8. So already some big times coming in.
Yeah, this is going to be really exciting to see these cars really get out there and, you know, figure out who's going to be on the pole. We got 2.4 hours of racing, so it's a bit of an endurance race. We should see pit stops first coming around 50 to 60 minutes in. So it's definitely going to be exciting to see how these drivers attack this from a strategy point of view. I really want to see the reliability of these cars, though. I want to see who's going to be able to not just put down that fast lap, but who's going to be able to keep it up there, who's going to be able to be consistent with these cars. It's going to be a challenge all race.
So then Salva's coming through. This is going to push into the 143s. The 143.4, that's a pretty good lap there, particularly in the third sector going purple. The DMRS Esports Bentley Continental, a very good solid run, but at the moment Eliseo Neto still has that 0.3 of a second advantage, and that comes down to confidence on the first run. Once you're out there, you know what the car can do. As long as you've got full and genuine confidence in what the car can do, you can throw it into those apexes, you can chuck it in on turn in, and you can get good traction off the apex. There's still a few drivers trying to get that up to speed a little bit. Stuart Barge in the Acura for HBD, about 2.5 seconds away from the pace. Stephen Miller in his trusty McLaren doing a fair job. There is Stuart Barge, who is trying to work his way forward. 10th overall, 4th in the AM category, still with a little bit of time to find, and only 1.9 away from the top AM category driver, who is currently Lewis Stevens in the Ford Mustang, and Stuart Barge now gets it to a 1:44.3. That's the kind of lap time that can build you a little bit more confidence. He's got time for 2 more flyers if he gets it nice and smooth on the next one. But this is where a real problem starts to come in, Mike. Traffic. In qualifying, it's a real game changer.
The traffic is definitely going to be something that these drivers are going to be dealing with all day long. Right now, we're just seeing the GT3 cars on the track, but once you start adding in the the Blondes Hypercars, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very tight through some of these sectors. We're going to see, you know, who's able to kind of control themselves and wait out, you know, smartly make an overtake, and we're going to see who is going to be a little impatient and try to force something when it's not there. But we see this beautiful Acura RSX coming through here. Stuart Barge, definitely in control here. I think Barge is going to have a solid qualifying qualifying session here. He is down on this lap, but as we saw there, the target time is a 1:43. He's in the 1:44, so a little off pace here, but should not be too far out.
Well, I'm very impressed indeed with Stevens, who's managed to find another big chunk of time. He's now 3rd overall in the GT3 category. That is pretty astonishing stuff. He's actually gone 3rd overall with a 1:43.3. That's only 0.4 away from the Audi R8 of Eliseo Neto. So some big laps coming in now. Lewis Lemos going well. There is Stevens in the Ford Mustang, who has now gone purple in the first sector. So he's making even more improvements for the AM leadership. And I wonder just how close he's going to get to Neto and King in the overall ranks. You've got to remember the difference between Pro and AM is usually around half a second per lap in terms of the average run time for each of these cars. But you'll get a lot more tighter gaps from the front to the back of Pro than you will the front to the back of AM, because obviously there's a lot more flexibility. But it's great to see people like Stevens really starting to knock on the door of the top 3 guys overall, because that's really where you get that confidence booster, where you start to think, well, maybe I'm not going to be an AM for much longer. He's gone purple across the 2 sectors. He's looking for a 1:42.7. How about that? That is a killer lap from Lewis Stevens. Unfortunately for him, Neto's just gone quicker as well, but that is a big statement from Lewis Stevens in the Ford Mustang GT3. For all of his opponents, that is quite simply, come and catch me if you can.
Yeah, that was a stunning lap there, as we see from that Mustang.
So Lewis Stevens has parked the Mustang. Excellent work there. That's job done as far as qualifying is concerned. 1.6 seconds done. John Mayer in the BMW, he's just banged in a 1:45.6. You kind of feel that he's left a little bit on the table there. But you've got to remember as well, Mike, as we get to the end of the GT3 qualifying, a lot of drivers will not be prioritizing their starting positions quite so much as their race program. That's the difference. You get some drivers who want to put themselves in the best possible position on the starting grid, but in a 2.4-hour race around Daytona, qualifying not always the most important factor.
No, absolutely not. Qualifying is an important factor to an extent, but once you get into this longer race here, it's all going to be about strategy and setup. So these guys that are kind of less concerned about their qualifying session here are definitely taking advantage of this opportunity to, you know, dial in the last little tune-ups that they need, make sure they got everything correct. But once they get their tires up to temperature, make sure their brake balance is comfortable in a good spot. So yeah, no, this is definitely going to be an important time for a lot of these drivers, not necessarily to put down the fastest lap time. As we see some of these Le Mans hypercars coming out, it's definitely going to be an important time for these guys, but not always about the fastest time in qualifying.
Indeed it is. Well, the 19 cars that have come out in GT3 qualifying are finishing their flying laps. And as you rightly mentioned, the hypercars are making their way out onto the circuit. For those of you who are watching via the CMS Racing YouTube feed, as well as JPB YouTube, do not fear, guys. We know that there's a slight difficulty on the technical side. We are resolving the issue. We will do a cleanup of the situation during the warm-up session, where we're hoping to be joined by Ross Smith, who is actually going out onto the circuit right now in the hypercar category to lay down his own lap time. So we'll get some insider knowledge as to how things are currently progressing. There is Ross Smith, so hopefully we'll hear from him after his qualifying run, and he is driving the HPD Acura. And now, ladies and gentlemen, you really get your first taste of 2023 VWSC hypercars in full anger. And boy, oh boy, do these cars look even better than they did in Hypercar last year. Last year we had some theoretical supercars. Now we have got ourselves some real giant killers that are going to change the face of sports car racing forever. And in VWSC trim, my, are they magnificent.
These hypercars are definitely going to be a complete game changer. These drivers are going to have to take a little bit of time to get a little used to them, but these guys are all so good at what they do. There's a reason why they're out there on the track today. But it's going to be very important for these guys to get to know these cars throughout the season, because this is going to be the blueprint going forward for quite some time now with these new regulations, these new cars. Like you said, last season they were running a bit of a conceptual idea, but this season, you know, they've really got it locked in. Can't wait to talk to Ross here, because some of the things that he was mentioning in the pre-brief between the three of us here, well, I guess four if you count James, but we don't always want to count James. Anyways, but yeah, no, it's going to be really interesting to hear what he has to say about how this mod has come together and how these cars are, you know, so accurate to real life. As far as what I was taking from it, it sounds like they've really done a phenomenal job getting these cars dialed in and getting ready for this 24-hour, 2.4-hour, 24-hour event here that we're about to start.
Indeed, indeed. Not counting James. Cool, your check's not in the post, is it? Moving on, we got these hypercars out on the circuit. It's going to be a really exciting battle. Just before the hypercars bang in the laps, we can tell you Alessio Neto was the fastest of the GT cars in the Audi R8. Lewis Stevens actually went second overall and was only 0.067 off the pace of the pole position overall in GT3. Absolutely incredible. Alec King was the third quickest, then Vasilis Katavanakis from Vinicius Gonçalves, Brandon Gant, Johnny Gutierrez, and then Luciano Picasso. The top 10 rounded out by Luis Lemos and Stuart Barge. We'll pick up that narrative a little bit later, because the hypercars are banging it in already, and Brian Hall in the Hall Brothers Caddy has already opened up the taps with a fabulous, scintillating 133.135, which is very comparable to the lap record in real life that was set here last year by Alex Palou, the IndyCar champion from 2021. So amazingly, the pace of these cars is already pretty souped up.
Yeah, and we're going to see it, as we already see, cars gone down into the 132s almost into 131. So yeah, we're going to be a little bit faster than that real life fastest lap here at Daytona. I'm expecting to see, you know, in these qualifyings, low 32s, high 31s, as we've already seen here. Sellers 132.03 there. That's an astounding lap there. They're already 10 seconds faster than the GT3 cars, which to be expected, obviously, but to see it happen this quickly, definitely impressive.
We've got yellow in sector 1, so obviously drivers trying to find that little bit of a limit. Personal gains for Brian Hall, who is currently in P6, so he's going to want to try and get that little way further forward. Kirby goes top, 131.8 for Kirby. Very good run indeed, as Guillermo Benchka has now gone third for the Stuart Haas Cadillac. So good to see him putting in a good run. He's now boxed it, so hopefully he'll come out for one more. There's Norm Graff in the Cadillac. So he's trying to work his way forward. Goodness me, trying to go for the smallest gap in history at the S's. Always a bit difficult to read the situation when you're there, going wheel to wheel with your opponents. Walter de Bruin has popped up for Ricky Monsters in the BMW. Second position for him so far. Xander Talman going well in the Peugeot 908. So a very good run from him so far. Third position for him. And then we've got Bradley Sellers in his BMW M running in fourth position. Graf comes across the line at 133.2. So not quite at the pace that he would be hoping for. But Dan Kirby, of course, as a former champion, will be hoping that 2023 starts exactly where he remains. 131.009. He means business.
Yeah, that's an absolutely flying lap right there. So I was predicting into the high 131s. He's just blowing my prediction out of the water. So clearly this is all new to me. I'm going to have to get my guesstimates a little bit closer here as we go along further. But yeah, what a fast lap there by Kirby, just putting it in. Currently 7/10 up on De Bruin. Absolutely insane as we start getting to about halfway point in this qualifying section. It'll be interesting to see, as we saw in the GT3s there, who's going to kind of sit back and start working on their race pace and who's going to continue to try and go for that pole position.
Well, Timon Suvic has just joined the party. He's gone fastest in the AM category. In the Acura, there he is, a 132.2 for him. So he's managed to beat Philippe Henrique, who is currently in 12th overall, second in the category. And then you've got Wayne Hutchison in front of Benchka, who is currently 19th overall. And then you've got Barry DiMarzo, who is just a whisker in front of Miller, who has yet to set the pace. So still very close in Hypercar AM at the moment. Kirby is still trying to stretch away from his teammate John Uyan, who has now got second. There's a spinner right in front of Timon Suvic. So that didn't quite go according to plan for Suvic on that lap. He's had to bail out of that one, and he knows it. Now, that was it was Felipe Enrique that we saw spinning there in the HPD Acura. So hopefully he's going to have a bit of a better run this time of it there. Although, mind you, that's Enrique coming across the line on a 134.2. So it must have been the sister car that went off the road there. John Uyan exiting pit lane on a 131, but not quite the same sort of pace as his teammate. He's still got to find another half second at least if he wants to be anywhere near close to as competitive as his teammate. But John Uyan knows that he really has to pull something special out of the bag if he's going to take on Dan Kirby. There's George Angelidis, our friend and colleague, HPD Acura, 8th position overall so far for him. Now, he's obviously been making steady progress all the way throughout. George Angelidis had a very strong 2022 campaign in both modern and historic. And coming into this 2023 season with the HPD Acura, still making good strides forward. This is a great chance for George Angelidis to start the season in winning form. He really does breathe the heart and soul and life into VWSC, and it's great to see the amount of work. We now know what we're talking about based on his incredible study to put the crib sheet together for us, and we really would be nowhere without him. So George Angelidis putting in some great performances as he hops and skips over the curb. It was really, really smooth on the radius there. The car wasn't traveling at any point. Easy to do that on an out lap, but on a flying lap, you really have to be very calm and very collective. But look at the sparks that he pulls up. You really are traversing the edge of the tarmac as you run through that final section and onto the banking. And that's where these cars really are riding the limit of adhesion.
Yeah, that little jump there that going from the inside course there to that big banking, it can really just unsettle the car so easily. We see, we got this awesome cheat sheet here in the Acura ARX. We see that it's highly setup sensitive, so you have to really get this Acura dialed in. You have to really set it up to exactly what you want. And it not only to be able to, get in a quick lap, but it's really more about the race pace, in my opinion. That I've always been more of a let's get it done in the race type of driver, if that makes any sense. I always kind of focus on what the future can bring. You can put in a lap or two that is just absolutely stunning, but in my opinion, it's all about being consistent with it. So with that being said, this Acura is going to be really interesting to see who was able to get a long stint really cleanly set up in these cars.
Well, it is. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very interesting to know who has and who hasn't done this. I mean, the majority of the contenders for this weekend have gone for either the Acura, the BMW, the Peugeot, or the Porsche. And that's a really interesting method of going about it, because the Acura, you're a very, very strong car in terms of the acceleration. It hits 10,000 redline RPM. The cornering is very, very strong in the Acura. The BMW is pretty much your all-rounder. It can handle pretty much everything to the same standard. It's a very smooth and very rhythmic car. You can be quite nimble with it. The wheel feels quite light, so you can be quite strong in all areas. The Cadillac, it's pretty fast. In a straight line, it's pretty fast on acceleration, and it can handle the corners quite well. So on the long run, the Cadillac's not a bad car to shoot for. The Peugeot, well, it's the fastest of all of the cars in a straight line. And here on the banking, of course, that's really, really valuable. But then if you look at the Porsche, it's actually the fastest in acceleration, but it's also the best, the smoothest, and most responsive of the cars in the bends. So which do you actually go for? Do you prioritize straight line speed, or do you prioritize good acceleration off the turns? Because the most of the fast speed is going to come from the banking onto the main straight. But you've got so many of those tight and twisties in the infield section, it really is going to be a tough call. Which do you go for, speed or control?
Yeah, and I think it's blatantly obvious with the Porsche. Like you said, it's the fast accelerating, it's the best in the corners, but it also has the slowest straight line speed, which is going to be huge here at Daytona. Yeah, you have those quick little bendies in the middle of the infield, but that long straight into the bus stop chicane and then into another long curve, turns 4 here at Daytona on the NASCAR track, it's going to be really important to be able to not only have that top end, but to, be able to draft these cars effectively in certain situations. So I think just by looking at the information that I have in front of me, I would say the Cadillac is probably, like you said, going to be the best car statistically on paper for the longer runs. I think we're going to see some of these Cadillacs really start to push towards the front of the field the further we get into this race. And like you said, that Acura is going to be very strong here as we see the Peugeot is taking the top spot.
I mean, did you see the time that Dan Kirby pulled out? A
Absolutely insane.
1:30.7. That is a monstrous time. It's a 1-2 for the CMS Pro Peugeots. Wouter de Bruin has gone third for the Rookie Monsters in the BMW. His teammate Brad Sellers riding behind him. Then Xander Talman in the third of the CMS Pros. Then Tom Lane is in the leading Porsche, the Manta Squid, in P6. Brian Hall in the Hall Brothers Caddy. George Angelidis in the HBD Acura P8. Then Norm Graff in the Caddy, and ahead of Magnus Dahlgren in the Emmy Racing BMW 10th position. 11th went to Magnus Dahlgren, although that has now changed, actually. So I'll come back and update that. Ross Smith is now 11th position. Matthew Overton for the Dogs and a Kiwi Porsche. Then Gilles Lalonde in his Peugeot in front of Eric Moynet for the Acura Mistral. And this year they have gone for the Porsche 963. Then you have Timon Suvic, who's gone well in the AM category, a 132.2, 1.3 clear of Wayne Hutchison in his Porsche. Then Philippe Enrique, Guillaume Benchka, Barry DeMarzo, and the man who didn't set a time, the Stewart House Cadillac of William Miller. So we'll have to see what he can do in race trim. Let's go back and have a look at the GT3 competitors in a short while, because they've done an absolutely sensational job. It was Eliseo Neto that got the fastest time in the Audi set by Visceral Esports. Then Alec King was 0.6 of a second back from him. Only a few hundredths off that was Vasilis Katrinakis in the Stardust Acura, I should say, sorry. Vinicius Gonçalves in the BMRS Bentley Continental. Then Brandon Gant in his SRA Unity BMW. Johnny Gutierrez in the AMG. And then Luciano Icazo in the Continental. John Mayer in his M4. And Will Novak in the XLR Corvette. That's a very competitive grid of drivers there in that particular run. In the AM category, Lewis Stevens was only a whisker off the overall best. Lewis Lemos, 1.6 seconds back. Then Stuart Barge a whisker under that. Eugene Mazur, Mike Boyce, and Stephen Miller, all very close indeed in their Porsche, Lambo, and McLarens, respectfully. Then it is Francisco Costa in the Cisco Air Audi, Filippo Morazzi in his 488, James Bowders in the Red Weasel Porsche, and Craig Pullen in the Reptile BMW. And then Tom Mountjoy, Stephen Boyce, and at the back of the field, yet to turn a lap in competitive running, it is the Ferrari of Ed Jones. We are very excited to see how things are going to progress then as we battle in for the Daytona 2.4 hours. But that is obviously qualifying done and dusted. And one of the men who can tell us a little bit more about the behind-the-scenes natures of these cars is Ross Smith. T-Nads, tell us about these fantastic 2023 Hypercars. They look stunning to behold.
Aren't they, JK? Thank you guys for having me, and thank you for coming in today. Really appreciate it. But yeah, the Hypercars are definitely the new sensation for the year. You know, we had a big push last year with the on the GT3 side. We did our fantasy series with the Hypercars that existed, but were mostly track day cars as we were anticipating the big push for these things to come out. So we're super excited. We've spent many thousands of hours behind the scenes with Storm Gang Simulation, of which I'm part of, in order to get these things going. And George Angelides, who's currently adminning, he definitely want to come in and talk for hours about these things, probably do a whole podcast about it. But he's busy doing his admin duties right now, going through the race brief. But just some highlights. Obviously, we have the LMDHs, the 4 that are registered and are running for the season. All 4 of them are in here. All 4 of the LMHs from WEC, they are here that are registered for the season. The Bicles is not in. Some people have asked